Hey, that Jeep got a Hemi?
Why, yes it does.
Sweet. You heard it right. Today on Xtreme 4x4, our TJ roars with a 5.7-liter Hemi swap. Plus, no glamour in these pits. Low-buck weekend tough truck racing. Four-wheel jamboree style.
Now, whether you love building off-road vehicles like we do, or maybe your cup of tea is a muscle car or possibly a street rod, sooner or later there is one project that we all have to tackle, and that is an engine swap. Now, a few years ago, swapping engines, well, it was kind of like the Wild West. There was no rules and no laws. If you could fit it under the hood, well, heck, you didn't even have to fit it under the hood. If you could get it to run, you could drive it on the street. Well, times have changed, and now the government spends just as much time under your hood as you do behind the wheel. And there's rules when it comes to swapping an engine in. And that's what we're going to do today. A 50-state legal V8 Hemi swap. Now, the 4-liter straight-six engine found in modern Jeeps is actually a pretty good motor. Most of the time, if there was nothing wrong with it, you just leave it alone and run it as is. But if you're after that big V8 power, a popular swap used to be grab a small block Chevy 350 because they're cheap to build and they're plentiful to find. But if you're like us and you're building a truck that you want to drive on the highway as well as wheel on the trails, it means you're going to have to pass emissions. Now, what does that mean? Well, it honestly depends on what state you live in, but there are honestly 4 basic guidelines to follow. The engine has to be offered in the same vehicle model or class by the same manufacturer. The engine must be the same year or newer than the vehicle it's going in. All emissions devices must be in place and working. And finally, the vehicle must pass standard emissions testing. Now, for our TJ, we chose one of the most popular V8 swaps out there for the modern Jeep, and that is the 5.7-liter Hemi. Now, this we bought online for less than $2,000 with the motor and the tranny. It was pulled from a wrecked truck and has less than 24,000 miles on it. And best of all, it is a 50-state legal swap for our TJ, and here's why. It was offered in the Grand Cherokee model Jeep, making it an acceptable swap for SUVs like our TJ. It's a 2005 model, and our Jeep is an 03, so obviously it's newer. And we bought it with all the emissions devices on the engine. Once we're finished, we'll take it down to the local emissions testing station and make sure it'll pass. Now, obviously this Hemi's not going to bolt right in place in our Jeep, so we called up the guys at Tera Flex and had them send us one of their universal Hemi install kits for the TJ. It comes with new motor mounts, transmission adapter, as well as their belly-up skid plate to hold the transmission and transfer case. And once this is installed, we'll just have to weld in some brackets. We'll be good to go. We're going to remove all of the factory harness off of the engine. We're going to replace it with an aftermarket one later. Then the whole assembly can be slid in between the frame rails of the Jeep. Skid plate will protect both the transmission and transfer case, and the universal motor mounts just get tacked to the frame. Now, we did some research on this swap, and we knew before we even put this motor in here that we're going to have to change our exhaust manifold on the passenger side. Now, our Hemi came out of a truck, and the exhaust exits straight off the back of this manifold. Unfortunately, on the Jeep, that's going to put it right into the bulkhead, be almost impossible to get a Y-pipe on there. Now, the Grand Cherokee version of the Hemi, the exhaust manifold twists and dumps down, make it a lot easier to build a Y-pipe just by changing this manifold. Now, obviously, if we'd had a Hemi out of a Grand Cherokee, we wouldn't have to do this, but the simple fix, make it all worth it. The 4-liter in our TJ is set up like a lot of other cars out there, with a throttle cable attached to a pedal mounted on the firewall. Now, the Hemi, it is a drive-by-wire, which means all that's attached to the throttle pedal is an electrical connector. So we picked up a throttle pedal assembly, also from a Grand Cherokee with a Hemi, that will mount on a Tera Flex bracket up on the firewall. So with our Hemi finally mounted in place for good, we can go ahead and reinstall this front shock hoop support tube. And you can really get an idea that although the Hemi is a large engine, there is tons of room under the hood of the TJ. We got lots of room for exhaust on both sides, no steering issues, and if we even wanted to keep the mechanical fan on the front, there's lots of room between it and the radiator.
Coming up, beyond the spotlight and big sponsorships, these guys race for weekend glory. That's next when Xtreme 4x4 continues. In Xtreme 4x4's event of the week, we're off to Gearhead Heaven at the Indianapolis 4-Wheel Jamboree.
For those that love motorsports, there is no place like a 4-wheel Jamboree.
Just all sorts of cool stuff. Jamborees are definitely where it's at. It's the largest convention of gearheads around this country. You got all kinds of monster trucks, mud drag cars, tough trucks, show and shine. It's a blast.
Running Jamborees for 26 years, what better place to host the season finale than the motorsports capital of the world?
Indy is, the maker of all motorsport places you go. Everybody comes here to try to win.
You can expect anywhere from 50 to 100,000 spectators.
It's very exciting.
And it doesn't get any more exciting than the Mickey Thompson Tough Truck Series.
Pretty extreme deal for a four-wheel drive truck. It's a combination of drag racing, motocross, circle track, and a whole lot of fun.
Running side by side on an S-shaped track,
It's intense, it's fast, there's no room for error out there.
one mistake sends them packing.
You have an elimination bracket. You gotta keep going through the rounds. If you don't win that round, you're out.
You got to be able to walk that course and know what you need to do to make things go your way.
Winning 4 of 6 races this season, it's been going Sonny Dorman's way.
I don't want to get cocky and anything like that, but it's nice to be on top.
Backed by a handful of small sponsors,
Without a major sponsor, it's very difficult, but we're giving it our best shot.
Sonny's been locked in a season-long points battle with Jeff Diedick and his big money Amsoil back machine.
Yeah, I've been actually very surprised at how well he's been doing out there.
Without having the major sponsorship like they have, it's a battle that comes down to trying to be a better driver instead of having better equipment.
Around the pits, the Iowa native is laid back and soft-spoken. On the track, he's made a joke of the competition.
As far as the way I like to run it is try to get it as wide open as possible. Everybody else tends to back off on jumps, and I don't like to let up. My motto has always been is if you feel that you're in trouble, I hit the gas. My style is putting the pedal down, and that's what I like to do. Underneath the hood we have a 302. It's actually 347 cubic inches right now, and it's about 450 horsepower. The combination from what we have as far as the weight of the vehicle to the horsepower that it has, I think is a great combination. If you have too much horsepower out there, you tend to just blow the tires off and you're going nowhere. You need to put the traction to the ground, or the time's just clicking away.
Sonny's proved he has the hardware, and in his decade-long career, the time to win the title has never been closer.
I can't even describe it. It's unbelievable. I'll tell you what, I mean, just even talking about it, I get chills and tingles about being the winner of the championship.
By the luck of the draw, the title would be decided early in the bracket.
We actually pair up second round. We're going to pair up if we see it, and then that'll make the decision right there. Whoever wins that race is going to take the championship home.
Both drivers easily won their first race, setting up a second round title showdown.
Today that we're on the line for the championship, and that's where we want to be.
I think we will get him out in the second round.
Across the land, independent and low-budget racers look to Sonny to pull off the upset.
I'd like to see him win that points championship.
He ran a good year. He definitely deserves to win the championship just as much as they do.
In less than 20 seconds, the race was over, and gone were Sonny Dorman's championship dreams.
The championship has been right there, and I'm disappointed. It's been a good season. I mean, the only thing I could ask for better is first, I guess. We'll definitely be back.
Xtreme 4x4, where we are right in the middle of our 50-state legal V8 Hemi swap in our 2003 Jeep TJ. Now so far we've put our donor motor in between the frame rails, and since this was pulled from a 2005 wrecked truck, we know that we are on the right foot to having this truck licensed to drive on the street. Now all we have to do now is deal with the wiring harness to make this engine run. And since we are after emissions compliance on this vehicle, we need something a little more in depth than just a universal harness kit. So we put a call into the go-to guy for street legal Hemi swaps and their wiring harnesses, and that's Tony Squire at Hot Wire Auto. Now they are responsible for the majority of engine swap Hemis you see out there running around on the streets. And believe it or not, they have even put a Hemi in a brand new 2008 JK and had it pass California emissions. And that's no small feat. Now the first step for us was we had to send them our factory fuse block as well as the firewall harness off of our Jeep. They then added in all of their connectors and harnesses to work together with the original equipment harness instead of a secondary system working on top of it. Then they went ahead and built us an entirely new engine harness specifically for our Hemi to make it all run. Now this truly is a plug-and-play setup for our TJ. The factory harness is reinstalled into the passenger compartment and onto the firewall. Then the old engine harness is stripped, and the new one is routed around the engine and connected. Then the factory ECU is removed from the firewall to be replaced. Now this computer right here is a very important piece of this puzzle. You see, if we'd pulled this wrecked motor and gotten the ECU out of the original truck, we probably could make this motor run. But when we went to get the emissions test done on it, it would fail. Now the reason for that is simple. When they check your emissions on a modern vehicle, they're doing more than just sniffing the tailpipe. See, they hook up to the assembly line diagnostic link connector, that funny little connector underneath the dash, and they check everything. First, they check for vehicle trouble codes coming from the engine. Then they go through and do a random check of all the sensors in the vehicle and then measure the output of all the O2 sensors. And this truck here has 4 of them. Now when they do that, what they're looking for is to make sure everything is working well. And if it is, you still won't pass, because inside the computer is the vehicle's vehicle identification number stored in the memory. Now if you don't have that number in the computer matching the VIN number up on the windshield, the vehicle is coded as what's called a non-compliant vehicle, and therefore you will fail in most states. So what Hotwire did is they built this computer specific for our Jeep, burned our Jeep's VIN number in it, and loaded it with the software to run the Hemi, so that way we know we'll be good to go when it comes to emissions. But we aren't finished yet. We still have one last thing. Now, if you remember, when we removed the fuel tank in this Jeep, we set aside this evaporative canister that looks kind of like an octopus and a couple of tanks. Now, this is required to have this Jeep run, but more importantly, mounted on the side of it is something called an electronic leak detection valve. Now, these are calibrated to the engine that is in the vehicle. And since this one is set up for the 4-liter, if we hook this up to the 5.7 Hemi, the vehicle's going to throw a trouble code and the vehicle won't pass emissions. Our new leak detector is from a 2005 model Dodge with a Hemi, and it replaces the original one from the 6-cylinder. Then the evap canister can be reinstalled into the back of the Jeep. We're back on Xtreme, and we're putting a complete custom exhaust onto our 5.7 Hemi that we stuffed into our Jeep TJ. Now this is not an easy task. It's going to take time and patience and a lot of trips back and forth from the saw to the truck to make all the pieces fit. On our Jeep, we're going to be carrying the driver's side exhaust to the front of the engine, underneath the oil pan, and then back to the finished Y pipe. Then we remove it to finish weld it outside of the truck. Now we knew that the exhaust was going to be fairly complex on our Jeep. First of all, because nobody makes a kit that'll basically bolt right up to a 5.7 Hemi swapped into a TJ. So it's going to be a universal fit. And two, our Jeep from the factory had 3 catalytic converters, so we want to match that for emissions. So we had Magnaflow send us 2 of their small Spun converters that will work into our new Y-pipe, and 1 direct replacement converter for a 5.7 Hemi in a Grand Cherokee that will install downstream of the Y-pipe. Now, to build all of our exhaust, we had Magnaflow hook us up with a complete 2¼ inch full stainless universal hot rod kit, as well as one of their fully welded, fully polished flow-through performance mufflers, and then we'll finish it all off with a doubled wall stainless tip. A catalytic converter cleans the exhaust gas as it passes through it by using a catalyst. The catalyst reacts with the hydrocarbons and catches and holds the unburnt fuel particles to clean the exhaust before it goes out the tailpipe. Now with our Y-pipe in place, we'll bolt it up to the manifolds and then build back from there, making a complete tailpipe using all the pieces from our hot rod kit. Now the last thing we're going to do today has nothing to do with emissions on our Hemi, but it has everything to do with making this Jeep perform really well off-road. It's a complete hydraulic steering assist kit that we got from AGR Performance. Now it's going to convert our Jeep's newer style steering box over to this older type that's been drilled and tapped to divert fluid down to the rock ram that will mount on the front axle. And this will help us turn our 40-inch tires when they're bound up in the rocks. And it all starts with a new pump. The high flow pump bolts into the stock location right on our Hemi. Then the steering box will bolt up to the frame rail with a pre-92 lower shaft swapped in that we got from Davies Jeeps. And finally, the ram is mounted on the axle and then welded to the steering crossover bar. Now all that's left to do is to run the steering lines from the box back to the pump and reservoir, as well as a couple off the tap ports down to the ram on the axle. Now one thing that we did notice when we took the factory pump off the motor is the reservoir is broken at the bottom, as well as the power steering pump on this back edge. Now it probably happened during shipping, and that's just the risk you take when you buy an engine over the internet like we did. Now lucky for us, ours came from an actual wrecking yard, so we gave them a call and they're going to replace these 2 pieces for us free of charge. So that should give you guys an idea of all the work it takes to do a 50-state emissions legal swap into a modern vehicle. Now before you jump into a project like this head first, you might want to give the Department of Transportation in your state a call and find out what exactly is required legally for you to do to drive the vehicle on the road. It's going to be different everywhere you live. But before we go away today, I know there's one thing that you guys have been dying to hear all day, and I have too, and that's to hear this Hemi come to life. Now we still have a couple issues to deal with. Number one, we have to learn our throttle pedal to the engine, as well as I gotta plug up the O2 sensor holes. That's where that exhaust leak is coming from. But it sure is nice to know that when you do all that work, you can turn a key and have an engine fire right up. That's no big deal, it's broken already anyway. See you next time.